Meanwhile, on Thursday, though, 9 Republicans joined House Democrats in voting to hold Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress. Here's Representative Menny Thompson, the chairman of the House committee investigating the Capitol attack.
What sort of precedent would it set for the House of Representatives if we allow a witness to ignore us flat out without facing any kind of consequences?
Vice chair of the committee, GOP Representative Liz Cheney, spoke directly to members of her own party about the threat of January 6th and what it posed to, and the threat that it posed to our democracy.
There are people in this chamber right now who were evacuated with me and with the rest of us on that day during that attack. People who now seem to have forgotten the danger of the moment, the assault on the Constitution, the assault on our Congress.
The Department of Justice and Attorney General Merrick Garland will now decide what to do next with this case. Ryan, hopefully you knew I was coming to you because this is the DOJ here. What's Attorney General Merrick Garland going to do? And how might that be impacted by the fact that President Biden walked back some statements this week where he said, yes, people who defy congressional subpoenas, they should be prosecuted. Then he said, actually, it was inappropriate of him to say that.
That was an amazing moment, wasn't it? Because imagine in the last administration if that had happened, right? It just
right. I can't picture it, actually.
No,
but okay.
Just the idea that the president is sort of saying, oh, yes, I was wrong there. The Justice Department handles these matters, yes. And that's sort of the way it should work, right? We've had this sort of general political understanding since Watergate that the Justice Department is supposed to be a step removed. And I think that Merrick Garland has been trying to really lay that out and make that clear, because when these important decisions come down the line, like whether to charge Steve Bannon in contempt, he has to be able to show the Justice Department's independence and show that this was a decision that wasn't based on politics. This was a decision based on the law. And that's sort of what he's made clear so far. You know, I think that the reason the congressional investigation is so important is because if you look at the FBI investigation, there's only so many answers that that's going to really bring us. Right now, we've had 650 arrests from the FBI, and the total universe of chargeable defendants, meaning people who entered the Capitol or assaulted law enforcement outside of the Capitol, according to citizen sleuths I've spoken with, is around 2,500. So you consider we're about a quarter of the way there in terms of criminal defendants. This is going to have a very long tail. But there's a lot of what happened in the lead up to January 6th and on January 6th itself that is, in the category of awful but lawful. And I think that that's really...
Awful but lawful. We're going to coin that term, maybe?
Yeah. And I think that that's really what is going to be an issue here, because there's a lot that happened that there's not an obvious criminal charge that you could bring. And that's really what the FBI has to remain focused on.
Well, Mike, with all of that awful but possibly lawful stuff that's going on, I wonder what the balance is at the White House and really the calculation that President Biden has to make when he thinks about the fact that he wants to see this full investigation of January 6th, but he also doesn't want to be seen as getting in the way of the DOJ.
Well, I thought we saw a very interesting line drawn a few weeks ago, because in Washington, we know it's often Democrats versus Republicans, but very oftentimes it's executive versus legislative. And the president made a very significant decision as it relates to executive privilege a few weeks ago, directing the National Archives to, in fact, cooperate with the committee's investigation. They asked for an awful lot of documentation from the Trump administration. And when I spoke to officials in the White House counsel's office about this, they said, sure, typically you would want to protect a former president's executive privilege because you don't want to set the precedent that might affect you in the future. But in this case, President Biden believes very clearly that what happened on January 6th was not about a president's decision-making. It was about a direct attack on the Constitution. And it was a very important signal from this president, who was affected deeply, as all of us were, by what happened on January 6th, that he's going to cooperate in this case very clearly with Congress. And that is a case in which he can speak to the values of this country without interfering in an independent investigation on the judiciary.
And Seung, talk just about the politics of all this. There's a subpoena process that's gotten really politicized, especially during the Trump era, but there's also President Biden having to walk this back.
Right.
So talk a little bit about all that's going on.
Right. So what House Republicans did was pretty effectively make the vote this week on holding Bannon in contempt, basically a proxy loyalty vote for Donald Trump, when in fact that is not the case. You are trying to hold someone accountable for defying a lawful subpoena. This is actually fundamentally a question about congressional oversight and its ability to keep, to exercise oversight, to keep the executive branch in check. And I think, a handful of Republicans did acknowledge what that vote was about, but most of them didn't. And so that is kind of a microcosm of what has happened to these January 6th investigations. I think in the immediate aftermath, the members who were in the Capitol, who were so who are horrified and in danger and personally affected, they saw the dangers that this posed on them personally and what it could cause. But as time has faded, that has really faded from their memory, and they're really, out there defending the former president, aligning behind him, because they know that's their ticket back to the majority in 2022.
Jake, I can read your body language. Jump in.
This is a really simple issue. Steve Bannon is Kevin McCarthy, who I've covered for a long time and know quite well, has said this is an illegitimate committee. It's an illegitimate subpoena. In his view, it's illegitimate because the subpoena doesn't have any legislative purpose. That's not for him to decide, right? If Bannon wants to make that case in a court, I defer to you on this, but if he wants to make that case in court, he should go do that. Kevin McCarthy should not be the person who is making that decision for him. Mark Meadows was subpoenaed. He is talking to the committee in some fashion. Kash Patel was subpoenaed. He's talking to the committee in some fashion. Steve Bannon has decided to not, and that is contempt. I mean, they did the right thing according to almost everybody who says it privately.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ryan, just quickly, what do you make of all this when you think about the DOJ's role and what the position that they're in now?
Yeah, well, I mean, imagine if Republicans do take back the House in 2022, they're not going to be able to use this against the Biden administration, which is really what they want. They want to be able to hold the Biden administration to account. And if they sort of gut this process and say, nope, you don't have to comply with a congressional subpoena, how are they going to make that argument? I mean, it won't stop them from making that argument.
Yeah.
They will make that argument, but they'll look like hypocrites.
Right. Well, some smart foreshadowing there on your part.